She is the founder of uCast, which is streamlining the process of creating a podcast. So that's really exciting. I can't wait to talk about that today. But first of all, thank you, Rand, for being here and joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we talked before we started recording about how tired we both are. And I think a lot of people are going through that right now, just the sheer exhaustion of a COVID winter coming
Mhm.
out of that, but also being an entrepreneur in these times. Like, yeah, first of all, before we get into your business and everything, how are you doing?
Like I said, I'm terribly exhausted.
Yeah.
I think I've reached like my burnout point where like now I want to hibernate for a week and then go
Yeah.
back to work. So I'm excited for this weekend.
Yeah, me too. And although we're only on Tuesday, but the weekend will be here soon enough. Okay, great. So, I always start this podcast with the question, what is your answer to the question, what do you do?
I'm a creator. I'm a problem solver. I always introduce myself as an entrepreneur, but many people hear entrepreneur and they're like unemployed.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Not always false. Yeah.
technically unemployed. No, but I'm a problem solver, and that's what I've always loved. I am a strategist. I love finding problems, solving them, finding new and creative ways of approaching it. I'm also a designer, UX and UI designer. I'm new to the trade, but it's something that I absolutely fell in love with, and yeah, that's what I do.
Amazing. And so as we talked about, you have this new venture called uCast, which is about streamlining the process for creating a podcast. How did you get into, first of all, entrepreneurship, and then we'll get into the business that you started. So why entrepreneurship? But you say you're a problem solver, but how did you identify that you had that personality and then know that this was the route to go work-wise?
Yeah, so I'll tell you a little bit of a story. When I was a kid, we used to go to Syria every summer,
Mm,
and we had a very big farm. My family owned like a very big backyard and a very big farm, and we lived in a very small village. So as a kid, my brother and I would go to the backyard and we'd start making chocolate cakes out of mud. And then we'd go to neighbors and be like, "Hey, buy our cakes." And essentially, they were mud cakes. And then my brother, he's always been the creator. He created robots from like tissue boxes when he was like just 5. He
wow.
was he was always a genius, and he just found scraps and created things. And I would go to people and be like, "Look how amazing this is! Come and get it." And I tried to sell it for him, and I was always his advocate. And then there was like a time in his life where he became an artist, and he started drawing people and selling their portraits, and I became his manager,
Mm,
or his agent, where I'd start
yeah.
like selling all his portraits. And that's like the moment I knew, like, you know what, I'm a businesswoman and I will always be a businesswoman.
Mm,
And then I went to university, and I knew I was going to study business, but I didn't want to study the traditional Bachelor of Commerce, even though I do have a Bachelor of Commerce. I wanted to study something a little bit more unique, so I found the Entrepreneurship and Strategy program at Ryerson. And I was like, you know that what, this is perfect, because it was 4 years of just going out there and doing my own thing. Like my entire program was the university or my professors telling me, you have to go and create businesses and report them back to us. Those were my tests and
right.
reports.
So
So
little startups, kind of little startup projects,
yeah,
basically creating a startup every semester or something, right?
exactly. So like we
Right.
had a 2-year capstone that actually ended up being like 3 years. And essentially we had like first year we had to learn about the agile process and design thinking process of how to target a problem and how to see a problem from the user's perspective rather from our own entrepreneurial perspective.
Mm,
As entrepreneurs, you always see a problem and then you're like, here's the best solution, but you always forget about the customer. So like the first year was very much about it was user centric and how to think about the user every step of the way. And then the second 2 years were just going out there, creating as many businesses as possible, failing fast, working with startups, consulting startups,
mm.
like really immersing ourselves in that entire community. And I ended up working at 2 different incubators. One of them was the DMZ and the Science Discovery Zone, where I worked with fintech, science and biotech companies, which was pretty awesome on its own. So yeah, that's where my journey started, and that's where how I got into the entrepreneurial world.
Hmm. I just want to ask you about that because that's such an amazing education, it sounds like. So what would you say was the best thing you learned about how to put the customers first and how to see the problem from their point of view? Because I really relate to that idea of being an entrepreneur. When you pitch your company or talk about your company, you're always coming at it from your perspective
Mhm.
because you're working on your business. That's natural. You're in the business. You're thinking about all the different problems. But when you end up describing what you do, you kind of just talk about it from your perspective rather than what does it give? What does it give them? What does it give the customer? And more importantly, is that something they want and will pay for? So what did you learn practically speaking about the best way to understand the problem from the customer's perspective?
Honestly, and that's the step that I think 90% of entrepreneurs forget about, is just talking to people.
Hmm.
Um, it's just literally going out there and putting yourself in that community of problem,
Hmm.
right? So for example, like right now I'm working on podcasts. So part of the discovery process for me was creating my own podcast, not publicly, but going through that process of what it looks like to record the podcast, what it looks like to upload it, what it looks like to edit it, what it looks like to distribute it to the different hosting platforms that exist. It was talking to CEOs who created distribution centers for podcasts. It's talking to podcasters, talking to people who make money, talking to people who don't make money. Um, so really understanding the problem at a core, because what I noticed from certain startups is that they always create problems around the solution or
Hmm.
around the problem, but it's very difficult to tap into. Okay, so the problem is monetization, but why is the problem monetization here?
Right.
Like, what is the core of the problem, and how can you solve it at its core? Because
Hmm.
creating, band-aid solutions to those problems are really good, but it's never going to make you a unicorn, right? And
Yeah.
it's only like the unicorns who know how to solve the core issue and then expand it from there. Those are the companies or entrepreneurs that end up being, very big Silicon Valley entrepreneurs.
Right.
So again, I don't think I have the key to those answers, but it's
But
really
it's talking to people, right? You would say. And so, how did you go about doing that? Was it did you send people? Did you start social media poll campaigns? Did you do email marketing surveys? Like, how do you actually? I've always had this problem. Like, how do you create that customer outreach, that customer development?
honestly, Facebook is an amazing place.
Yeah.
Facebook or Reddit, those are like my three top places to do it. Um,
Reddit.
Reddit,
Yeah.
yes,
Right.
it's an amazing place.
Reddit
Oh,
users are really engaged, right? Like you post a question, people answer like right away. It's
oh,
very
but Reddit users are loyal Reddit users. Like that's
yeah.
their life, they're committed to the cause. And
Right.
so if you post something, like you will get immediately at least some people directing you to the right places or telling you what to do or where to go.
Yeah,
Um,
it's amazing. My wife posted something about our dog. She's like, "My dog keeps doing this. Like when we let her off the leash, what should we do?" And like within like an hour, there was just all these responses, and I was like, "Man, that's really
oh, that's
intense."
okay. And so like Reddit is such an amazing place. Another one is Discord. A lot of people say Slack, but I actually am a very big advocate for Discord. Um,
Discord,
yes,
huh?
it's such an amazing platform to join communities. It's essentially Slack for gamers.
Mm,
Now it expanded to podcasters, creators, investors. There's so many investing communities there. Entrepreneurs, gamers. You literally find anyone and everyone,
wow,
and you join a group, and you just start asking questions, and you will get so many responses.
amazing.
Many people, if they don't know it personally, they will direct you to someone that they know. um, so those are like my three top places. Also, TikTok is an amazing place that I found.
Right.
Not for I don't post things on TikTok myself, but I scroll. So let's say I'm talking about podcasting, I would just type podcasting, and because the algorithm is based on geolocation first and foremost, it gives me all the people in Toronto. So I'm able to really connect with people around me, and I can simply go to their Instagram and be like, "Hey, I saw your TikTok video. Would you be interested in having a conversation?" So those have been like also my favorite places to find people.
Amazing. That's so valuable and it's so useful. I have a big problem as an entrepreneur of getting talking to my customers and knowing what's the best way to ask them questions without bothering them and being like, hey, answer this like 5-minute survey for nothing and no reason. But I think the way that you're talking about is a lot more organic. It's just kind of going to these places where people like to talk anyways and just putting something out there. So yeah, so we keep talking about that you got into podcasting. So knowing that you were going to be an entrepreneur, how did you identify that podcasting was the problem that you wanted to solve?
So my professor, my entrepreneurship professor, he always told me like he would always draw this diagram and he'd tell me like entrepreneurship is not a straight line. It's like a wiggle all around until you find the pinpoint.
Yeah.
And like I always of course I understood what he meant, but I never really knew what he meant. Like it's one thing to understand it and it's one thing to know it, right? Um, and so I always thought it was going to be like the straight line that is going to take me to exactly what I wanted. But then like the way I started this entrepreneurship journey, I graduated last year in September, and I was like, it was midst of COVID, and I was like, okay, what the hell am I going to do, right? Am I going to get a full-time job? No, that's not what I want. So I was like, okay, let me join Founders Institute. Let me try to digitize business cards. Because like second year, I had this, what I thought was a brilliant idea. It's like, what if we digitize business cards? And it's like on your phone, you tap and boom, and now you have each other's contacts. So I was like, you know what, let me bring this back to life. So I went to Founders Institute with the idea to digitize business cards.
Mm-hmm.
And then I started talking to people, and I talked to maybe like 200 people. I sent out surveys on Instagram, I talked to people, I LinkedIn, all of those places. And then I realized that every single person was telling me the problem here is not, you know, bumping phones and getting each other's contacts right now. The problem here is finding people to connect with, right?
Mm.
LinkedIn is such an amazing place, but it's very difficult to know exactly who you want to connect with.
Yeah.
And then I kept on finding things like, oh, or hearing things like, oh, I don't know where to find events. I don't know where to find webinars. I don't know where to go networking anymore. And that's when I was like, okay, maybe I should shift the idea here or pivot. So I pivoted and I started focusing on webinars. So I started doing a lot of research on webinars and I started immersing myself in that webinar community. And I came up with the idea of a directory for webinars because there wasn't a directory for webinars at that time.
Mm.
So I started talking to more people and I started doing a lot more interviews. And then someone was like, you know what, webinars are cool, but you know what's a real problem here? Podcasting. And I was like, okay, that's very interesting. What is the problem with podcasting? And they were like, da 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 da. So I then pivoted and I was like, you know what, let me focus on webinars and podcasting. And then I started looking deeper into podcasting and
Mm-hmm.
um, I realized the problem is way bigger than I even imagined and there
Mm-hmm.
hasn't really a targeted solution. So that's when I completely did the shift from webinars to podcasts, and I've been focusing on podcasts ever since. So as you see, like it was like just like a wiggle all around until
Yeah.
I found this. And maybe that's not even the problem I'm going to end up solving, right? Maybe
Right.
this going to lead to another pivot, and yet another problem to be discovered. And that's honestly the journey of an entrepreneur, right?
Yeah, well, it's really interesting because I that is the journey of many entrepreneurs, and but it's hard for somebody like me who came into entrepreneurship almost accidentally. I had this sort of this interest, which was teaching and kind of which turned into coaching, but I didn't think of myself as an entrepreneur. My first startup was with some co-founders, and I was kind of joining as the like teaching expert, not like I had no business acumen or savvy at all. I wasn't part of the project for any sort of sense of business. I was part of the project because I knew how to teach, and that's what we were doing. We were an education agency. And then slowly, as I worked on that project, I went, okay, there's a whole set of jobs behind the actual delivery of the product. And so I had to do it. I didn't want to do it, but I had to because there was nobody else. I mean, there was other co-founders, but there was nobody, because I was a co-founder, you have to pick up the slack and work wherever you are and get done what needs to be done. Then when I started my current company, I knew a bit more out of, okay, what are the tasks that the entrepreneur is required to do? If you're founding a company, what are the things you need to do to make that business successful? And I'm obviously still learning that, but I'm more of a reluctant founder, I would say. I want to do my work, and things like accounting and marketing and sales are like annoying to me. They bother me. I want to have conversations like this. I love the podcasting, like doing this. I love connecting with people. I don't even mind sales in terms of like when I find somebody who's really interested and explain to them the concepts. I don't mind that, but most of the tasks are really annoying to me. So what's really interesting is that you have been so clear about knowing that you were an entrepreneur that you go, okay, it's not about the problem, it's about my uh, ability to solve a problem and create a business around that.
Yeah,
And so, like with podcasting now, I assume that other entrepreneurs will be a big target market for you, right?
absolutely.
Yeah. So tell me a bit more, because I've started to realize it. Why are entrepreneurs? Why do they need a podcast? Why is a podcast good for an entrepreneur?
So there are different elements to it, and the most obvious one is exposure. As an entrepreneur, it's very difficult to gain credibility. there's this community, and I think that that is within every profession.
Hmm.
Every profession has this close knit community where everyone knows each other, and the people within that community, they have credibility or they don't have credibility.
Hmm.
Um, and it's like, if you know someone within that community, they will tell you, hey, talk to this person. They know their shit. You can go to them. You can trust them. I trust them. They've helped me. Blah blah blah. With entrepreneurs, especially upcoming entrepreneurs, and like myself, like I'm very young. This is my first time doing it publicly and professionally. Um, it's very difficult to gain that credibility
Mm.
and that trust. And when you have, and I think for an entrepreneur, trust, your values, your principles, the way you approach the business, I think is way more important than any other skill.
Mm.
And because there's no guarantee with an entrepreneurship. You can be the biggest failure or the biggest success, and the one thing that is going to matter throughout this entire journey, I believe, is your personality,
Mm.
and your ability to gain people's trust and loyalty.
Right.
And that doesn't happen quite often when you are just sitting down and solving the problem, because there are millions of people trying to solve a problem, right? And there's nothing that makes you special. So how do you go out there and expose yourself to those communities and tell them, hey, I am special?
Well,
Not
that
because
is what makes you special, right? Is sharing your story, would you say?
exactly, it's like sharing your story, putting yourself out there, showing people and investor what makes you different, what makes you unique, talking about the problem, always being resilient. And that's all exposure. That's something that entrepreneurs don't really have access to.
Hmm.
um, a lot of entrepreneurs are actually introverts, and they actually hate that part of the
Yeah.
job. And just sitting in front of a podcast and just talking is way easier than going to a networking event and being like, hey, I'm creating this solution, come
Yeah.
invest in me, right?
I'm an extrovert and those things are brutal.
Right,
Like,
even for
yeah.
extroverts, it's
Yeah.
brutal. Yeah, so sitting in front of a camera and just talking one-on-one or with yourself or with another person is just so much easier for your exposure as an entrepreneur.
Okay. I have a podcasting technical question for you. What podcasts tend to do better? Podcasts that are one person talking or somebody interviewing another person? Is there a difference in between those? And is there one that you would recommend for an entrepreneur who wants to get into it? Because my format, obviously, as you can tell, is talking to another person. I never really think that I want to sit down and just start, you know, pontificating about the problems. I want to get somebody else with a different perspective. I like to talk on my own ones, but to get my own story out there and talk about my own ideas. But I like the idea that I can bring in experts and people from different fields all around the topic of entrepreneurship and self-starting businesses and communication and pitching and all the things that I teach. But is there a difference in terms of engagement, in terms of growth, in terms of all that kind of stuff between the two formats?
So this is very interesting because podcasting started as just someone talking to themselves, audio, and just
Hmm.
publishing it.
Right.
Um, and then people started discovering that it's more interesting to have different points and different set of perspectives on that podcast, especially if you have interesting people coming on like Elon Musk or professionals and people that are very well known.
Hmm.
It definitely brings a lot of buzz. So I would say two people or even three people podcasts do a lot better.
Hmm.
But you also need to realize the differentiation between the business model of different podcasts.
Right.
Some podcasts, for example, like Jordan Peterson is one of, he has an amazing podcast, and I love listening to his podcast. And it's just him talking about topics. But Jordan Peterson is a scholar and an expert enough that he can do
Right.
that, right? I'm not a scholar or an expert enough to just sit here and talk about entrepreneurship myself.
Right.
I think it really depends on your business model.
Uh-huh.
If your business model is, I am a tier A in my profession, I know the shit I'm talking about, I've
Yeah.
been
Yeah. Right.
30 years plus, then yes, a one-person podcast would work and it would get a lot of attention. But if you are someone like me, just talking about different topics, no one's gonna want to listen to me speak and babble, about my own experience as a 21-year-old. So that's when like another set of hands and another set of experiences come into place, and that's when it
Right.
does.
And
And then
sort
there's
of like, oh, sorry, go ahead. Yeah. Yeah. So not to cut you off.
actually now a third type of podcast that's coming up, which is narration podcast. So that's like true crime or
Right.
something business
Yeah.
world,
Yeah.
where they're narrating a story, and that's
Hmm.
actually doing impeccably well in the podcasting industry. It's gaining a lot of engagement, it's gaining a lot of traction, and people are loving this narration style. So now there's more styles coming up than just talking on your own or talking with people.
Right. Yeah. And that's a whole other thing. I would imagine that um, the narration requires a lot more planning and editing than the other two styles we talked about, right? In order to create a story, you've got to do a lot of like storyboard work on the front end. Go, okay, what is the story I want to tell? I've got to get footage from lots of different things. And at least the ones that I've heard, like Serial or I'm trying to think of these other narrative ones. What was it, S Town or something? There's these really popular podcasts that were stories, and they were part interviews, part narration. That requires a lot of planning.
Productions. It takes a professional production team to
Yeah,
get.
right. So I would say for probably your advice and for most people starting out is if you just want to get that exposure, you have some ideas, you're an entrepreneur and you want people to know what it is that you talk about, what it is that you stand for, what your values are, and just to get to allow them to hear your voice and see your face a little bit and to create a bit of recognition and credibility. The easiest thing to do is either just talk into a microphone or interview somebody else. I
Absolutely.
would say, yeah, okay, that's great, yeah, and then so for the sort of Jordan Peterson model, that would be like if you really know your stuff, you can kind of go on for a good amount of time and have your own content, then that's great. But if you're sort of more of an everyman person, like let's say Joe Rogan, then you'd
Mhm.
want to bring other people, experts on and interview them. Yeah, but I see myself like you in the sense that like nobody wants to listen to me talk for an hour, so I'm going to bring on interesting guests and allow that um, to start the conversation. And also, I don't know how you feel about this, but I always notice with a podcast that's a conversation, it almost feels like you're sitting in with some friends or something in that
Yeah.
way that we're always so disconnected now.
Mhm.
And you listen to two people having a chat and you're kind of like, oh, I could just be hanging out in a living room somewhere. Or hanging out in a cafe or in a bar and just kind of chatting. I don't get to say my thing, but I get to like listen to people sort of chop it up, and that's kind of very comforting. It's almost like you're spending time with people.
It's actually very interesting, the psychology of podcasting and how people react to podcasting when they listen to it. It's mind blowing. It's this, you're creating this one way relationship with the people who are running that podcast, because like you said, it's more like a conversation.
Mm,
So it's almost feeling like you're listening to your friends speaking and you're just sitting in on the conversation and just taking it all in.
mhm.
Um, there is definitely that barrier of, oh, there's so much I want to say as a listener, that I can't. And there's right now no ways of, or like very little ways of interacting with the creator, which is another disadvantage in the podcasting community. But
Yeah,
definitely is that friendship, one-way friendship that is created when listening to a podcast.
right. And I think that's also important for founders as well, business owners, is we
Mhm.
do business with people we like. We hire people we like. We want to give our money to people we like because we're social animals. We operate on a sort of familiarity basis. If you don't like someone, you're probably not going to hire them unless they're really good at what they do. So creating a friendship, one-way sort of friendship message is really important. Um,
Absolutely.
And so, yeah. So, what do you think are the biggest barriers right now to starting a podcast?
So there are a bunch of barriers. There are so many solutions that help you start a podcast, that help you edit the podcast, that help you distribute a podcast, that help you get analytics for a podcast, that helps you get some sort of monetization. There's Patreon. There are so many solutions out there, right? But I personally get overwhelmed. Like I'm somebody who, if I search something and I get 1,000 lists of all solutions, I will honestly close all tabs and be like, I'm done. Like
Hmm.
it's too over an overload of information, like just wrecks my brain. um and that's one thing that I noticed when I wanted to start a podcast. I'm like, oh my god, there are so many of these things, there are words that are thrown here. There's like, CMP, there's CRP, and I'm like, I don't know what that means, I don't know what this is.
Yeah.
So I was like thinking to myself, I'm like, I wish I could just like post it like Instagram, or like, how Clubhouse, you go on there and you just start audio streaming, and
Right.
that's it, there's nothing more to it.
Hmm.
And I think that's the number one first barrier is, it takes so much to build a podcast that it becomes overwhelming, and it creates a barrier for anyone to be able to create it.
Right.
Now, once you move on from that barrier, there's another barrier, a set of barriers that local podcasts and niche podcasts don't have exposure. So for
Hmm.
example, if you're listening to a basketball podcast, you're probably going to hear a lot about different basketball teams that are from the US, more well-known teams, but it's very unlikely that you're going to hear about the Raptors, you
Yeah.
know, are in Toronto, or smaller teams in Toronto if you're really interested in basketball. But those niche sports podcasts do exist. So how do we gain exposure? If you're a history podcast, and again, you're very niche. If you're whatever kind of niche podcast you have created and you have a very niche listenership, how do you gain exposure? Because agencies, they focus on scalability. So when you get a sponsoring agency, they're going to look at you, or an investor, and they're going to look at you and they're going to be like, how much return on my money can they give me?
Yeah.
How much scalability is there? But a lot of these podcasts, the scalability is the wrong strategy. Their entire strategy is, how do I be niche and attract a niche listenership?
Mm-hmm.
So the second one is, how do we start help elevating those niche podcasts, the
Right.
podcasts that have a very loyal listenership, and doesn't need scalability but needs to keep on creating the content that they're already creating.
Right.
And we have the monetization. A lot of podcasters have been posting their podcasts on TikTok and YouTube because the current solutions that exist don't allow for good monetization models. So
Mm-hmm.
how do we start creating a monetization models for podcasters, where wherever they're hosting their podcast, they're able to get monetization through that as well.
Do they get paid on, sorry to interrupt, but do they get paid on TikTok?
Yeah, so TikTok, the way the TikTok model works is, anyone who posts videos on TikTok, if they reach a certain set of likes or views, they become a part of a creator fund. That creator fund starts dispersing money into it. So
Ah, interesting.
a lot of Gen Z podcasters are actually starting to put these segmented podcasts on TikTok rather than anywhere else, because they see like they're going viral very easily.
Hmm.
And that's the beautiful thing about TikTok. I'm always a very big advocate of TikTok and a very big fan, because their algorithm is so amazing that anybody with a niche topic can go viral if they're able to understand the algorithm well enough to do it and play
Hmm.
with it.
Yeah,
Um,
I just joined TikTok, but I'm still too embarrassed to make a video. So I'm yeah, as a millennial, I'm just like, I can't do TikTok. But I know that it would be a great engine for growth. It would be a good exposure for me. But I'm still too shy to to jump in there. Yeah.
So how do we create that same engine of growth into podcasting, right? And how do we bring that model into podcasting? Because if the same model of TikTok, where everybody can go viral, but then you choose who continues to be on your For You page or on your listenership or viewership, then I think that's a model that is great enough so that everybody has exposure. But then you decide who you actually want to continue watching or hearing from.
Hmm.
And then, like I said, the monetization one is a very big problem, and as well as advertising. So I read the stat where, out of the 2.2 million podcasts that exist, there are only 8,000 advertisers. Now those 8,000 advertisers are making $1 billion in ad revenue, or this year made nearly $1 billion in ad revenue. But those 8,000 sponsors or advertisers are only responsible for 0.3% of the podcasting
Right.
community. So what's happening to the rest, right? Those are creators that are putting their heart, their souls, their work, their time into these
Mm.
podcasts,
Yeah.
but they're not getting much in return. So how do we start? I'm not trying to make everyone a millionaire. That's really not my goal here. But how do I make it so that if you post a podcast, you can, if you, with a little bit of hard work, you can guarantee at least a monthly recurring revenue that is stable enough to give to help you pay rent, to help you pay your bills, to make sure that you're able to do this as a full-time creator, right?
Right.
So those are
Well,
the biggest pain points that I see.
right, that's great. So what I'm hearing is basically there's too much work to get started, and then once you do get started, it's hard to be noticed as a niche podcaster. Then after that, it's hard to monetize, and then it's also hard to get ad revenue. So those are kind of the four barriers that I'm hearing about. Um, but what is, in terms of just some numbers, like what is that threshold that you think you would need in terms of listenership to start making money? Because I think one thing that often scares me is I go, okay, I like doing my podcast. That's the only reason I do it, really. I know it has some return on the investment, but I haven't even thought about monetizing it. I use it as an exposure tool
Mhm.
because I have this thought in my head that I'm going to have to get way too many listeners before I start making money. So I'm just not going to try. I'm not going to
Mhm.
try to to build up my listenership because the number is so high that, why bother? I'll just do it as a way to like have some content marketing. So what would that number look like? Let's say for an entrepreneur like me, what would I need to get in terms of monthly listeners to be able to monetize?
Right now, it's 50,000.
50,000.
Right now, that's a minimum. That's
Minimum 50,000.
yeah. The minimum is 50,000 of active listeners to be able to even be considered for monetization.
I see. And that sounds to me, to be honest, like an intimidating number.
Scary. Like if
Yeah.
if my purpose here as a podcaster is, again, because podcasting, to do it is fun, right? But if you're a creator and you want to do something big and that's what you studied and that's what you want to do, if I hear I need $50,000 to start making a living, barely an income from this, or a return on investment from it, I would be too scared to even start, right?
Yeah.
And I would feel like all odds are against me to begin with.
Yeah.
I'm like, how the hell am I get 50,000? And the thing with podcasters, a lot of them are not marketers. You know, they're creators. They know how to create good stuff, but they don't know how to do the business side of it.
Like your brother.
Yeah, like my brother. Yeah,
Yeah, right.
Is a fucking genius. Like,
Yeah.
this guy has a mind of his own, but he doesn't know how to do anything else. Like, it's intimidating to think
So
that
many artists have no idea how to make a business out of their art.
exactly, like this guy created one of the most amazing digital abstract arts I've seen so far. And I told him, you can sell this as an NFT, which is the new non-fungible tokens that's going around. He's like, how do I begin to do that? I'm like, you just post it. You just post it, you put a number and you wait.
Yeah.
And just that thought alone of monetization is scary for a lot of creators. I'm like, how do I create a process so that they can focus on the creating and I do the entire business process for them?
Right.
Of course, not me myself do it for everyone, but how do I digitize that business process of podcasting?
Right. And then so that those are for the full-time creators. Do you suggest, like, if so, for entrepreneurs who may be listening to this, or people like me, the podcast is an extra thing and it's seen of as not necessarily mission critical, this term that everybody's using these days, whether something is mission critical or not, is like, okay, is it going to get a return on my investment? What do you think needs to go into the podcast in order for it to make it worth their time? If there's another business model, right? It's not their main driver of revenue. What is what needs to go into it to start a podcast and make it worth their time?
That's a very difficult question, because I think when you're doing it as a side thing, it really is not about the return. It's more about doing it because you have a purpose of doing it, right?
Which is usually exposure, right? And content marketing, like to put your ideas out there, and have educate your market on who you are and what you believe in, right?
Sometimes it's just really to get started. Like, I see a lot of right now, a lot of tech people trying to bring a little bit of exposure on tech stuff that they're doing through podcasts, right? So sometimes it's not even on that return on investment. It's just, I want to educate people on what I'm doing, or on tech, or on their niche expertise, right? So it's very difficult to say what those part-timers really look for. I think they just want, they have something that they want to express, and they want to express it to the world.
Right.
But it's very difficult to have that funnel to express it as a part-time podcaster, because you put out a podcast and then what?
Yeah.
Right. What do you do with that podcast afterwards?
Yeah.
If you're again doing it for a part-time, there really isn't a clear funnel of how to get it launched up and going very easily, very automatically. Like, for example, if you're creating a Shopify store, if you're doing it as a part-time hustle, it is very clear what you need to do. Step 1, step 2, step 3, here's growth, here's how you do it, this is how much you need to pay, this is advertising, everything's automatic, right? All you need to do is put in a couple of, maybe $1,000 maximum, and then you have your store ready and you know how to launch it, you know how to grow it.
Right.
We see that model has worked because a lot of people have made so much money from Shopify and e-commerce and dropshipping. But there doesn't exist the same growth model, automatic growth model that exists for e-commerce, that for podcasts or for the social media networks.
Right. Yeah. And any content creator, I guess, whether even if it's a YouTube channel or whatever it is that you're doing, it's hard to see it as a side hustle, as a viable side hustle. So what I'm really interested in is getting to is, if you're an entrepreneur who has a full-time job, I truly believe from my own experience that starting a podcast is one of the most powerful things you can do, because of the exposure that you get, because of the confidence and eloquence that it bestows upon you. Every time I sit down in front of this thing and talk to somebody, I get sharper and better at describing what I believe in around my topic. So it makes me a better coach. It makes me a better salesperson, makes me a better manager. It clarifies all of my thoughts, even just for myself. So what I'd love to know from you also is like, if I want to start that and if I truly believe that I might not make so much money off it, I might not even get to 50,000 minimum listeners per month, but maybe that's okay. And just the process of sitting down and talking to someone else or talking to yourself and getting your thoughts out there out loud and sharpened up on the sort of the stone of just saying things out loud. How do you start doing that? How do you go from not doing anything today to I have my first podcast out?
So personally, this is what I do. And I
Yeah.
might not have a podcast, but this is something that I do as an entrepreneur.
Mhm.
Uh, I find that my late night thoughts are a lot more sharper than my early thoughts. I don't know why. It's just when right before I go to sleep, suddenly my mind's like, now I
Oh,
want
yeah. Yeah, right.
it's like now I want to think about stuff.
Now you're trying to sleep. I'm just going to go a mile a minute and keep you awake.
Exactly. So the thing that I do is I just literally bring out my phone and I start recording. Like I just say
Mm.
whatever. It doesn't have to be anything that makes sense. I just whatever my mind's thinking, I just plurge it out, right? And sometimes starting with podcasts is a little bit scary because you're putting your thoughts out into the world. Um, that is scary for a lot of people. You know, you
Mhm.
and I are used to it, but for people who work in tech and are a little bit more introverts and are just used to sitting in front of a computer, putting that thought out is actually a lot scarier
It's
than
terrifying. Yeah.
terrifying because now people are judging you. People are listening to you. They're analyzing what you're saying and they're posing their opinion now back at you, right?
Mhm.
And that's a very scary thought. So I would say if you want to start and you're not used to this, just start recording yourself speaking and type things out. And then you're going to notice that you actually have pretty good ideas. And once you actually start catching your brain thinking and catching it out loud, to yourself, you will gain a little bit more confidence in your ability to speak out loud to other people.
That's really cool.
And
So,
that's essentially like how I do it.
so just start by recording and not having any plan for that content, just getting it down and getting it recorded somewhere, like whether it's on a voice memo on your phone. Also, one thing I noticed, the new Microsoft Word update has a really good speech to text function.
Yes, it does.
Yeah, so you just I used that the other day. I'm writing a book right now, so I just dictated like half a page just because I had the thought, and I was like, oh cool, I'll use this function. Works really well, and it's getting better and better too at lots of different languages. So if English isn't your first language and you want to record in your native language, or if English is if your English is not super strong, it's getting better at recognizing different accents. So it's really a great thing
Mhm.
to use, and I really like that idea of starting before you ever plan on publishing it.
Yeah.
And then in terms of actually publishing a podcast to the world, what's the best way to do that as it stands now? Does uCast have a solution that you use? Is there anything else you'd recommend? What's the way to do that there?
So currently, I'm still building uCast, but the solution that I'm building is I'm trying to make it the easiest way to do it.
Hmm.
Um, it's as simple as you just like Instagram, you just upload a podcast. If you have pre-edited it or done it on a third-party plugin, you just simply upload it and you just drag it onto the hosting platform. Or if you want to live stream it, because a lot of podcasts they love live streaming and they don't want to
Hmm.
go through the editing process. You also have an option to live stream and just immediately be live with audio, just speaking to the world, right? Without having to worry about editing and all of that fun stuff.
And can you record into? Will you be able to record into uCast?
Yes, yes.
Yeah,
So
that's
it,
great.
everything's into you get
Yeah.
you again, it's still in its MVP stages, so it's not public yet. But that's the plan. That it's when it's
Right.
public, it's as easy as just putting an Instagram post,
I
right?
love that. Yeah.
Mhm.
And also, just to give people a solution for right now too. One thing that I used to do was Anchor, because Anchor is decent at that. They don't have the best audio, but you can kind of go. You can download Anchor and you can just speak into your phone, and then you can put that out there.
I've heard about Anchor. Again, I'm not sure, but correct me if I'm wrong. I heard that if you choose the free version, they own your IP.
Oh, really?
That's what I heard. That's what I've
Yeah. I didn't know that. That could very well be true. And in which case, yeah, they own about 5 of my
right?
early episodes. Yeah. But yeah, it's important to know that stuff. Like there's a lot of ways to get screwed out of your IP. And it's really interesting. Even the people at the very top of this game are talking about it. Like, I hear a lot of really big podcasters talking about how difficult it can be to protect the rights to your audience and your intellectual property, especially when you're facing off with companies like Spotify and YouTube and these huge platforms that have a lot of.
That's the idea of uCast. You own everything you do.
That's really cool.
I really couldn't give two shits about, trying to scam me out of your IP because I'm a creator
Hmm.
and I'm an entrepreneur. And if somebody comes to me and tells me, hey, give me your idea and then steals it and says it's mine unless you give me a portion of what you make, I'm like, that's bullshit.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolute bull, right?
It's a real shift, I think, that's happening in people because of non-traditional media becoming more and more popular. People are realizing like there's no reason that a handful of, like, let's say, record companies or network TV channels should be able to just control who gets to do what and make it, and also own the rights to most of that. So there's a lot of really cool companies like uCast, like yours, coming out now that are giving a lot of power back to creators. And then just as a final thing, what do you find the biggest struggle right now trying to build a company, trying to build out the tech, trying to, like what are you struggling with right now as an entrepreneur?
List if you want. I
Pardon?
can I can give you the full list.
Give me the full list.
So okay, to start with, finding the right people. I
Hmm.
am very picky. I'm very picky about who I bring onto my bus because I do believe that no matter how amazing the idea and the opportunity is, the right people are the ones that make it the right opportunity and the right idea. And
Yeah.
if it doesn't matter how, again, terrible or great, if you don't have the right people on the bus, there's no idea, there's no business,
Yeah.
there's nothing.
Ideas are worthless. It's about execution, right?
So,
Yeah.
it's getting people that I trust. And I'm a very casual leader. Like I'm not a boss that tells you do this, do that. I want you to be literally by my side, and I want to be by your side, right? And if we fail, I want us to cry together and pick ourselves back up together and work on this again and again and again. Um, and it's very difficult to find those types of people because that takes resilience, that takes a certain level of risk, and that takes the confidence in yourself and believing in yourself that no matter what, I'm going to make it work, right?
Mm.
A lot of people who are attached to a full-time job, I see that they lack the belief in themselves that if they get laid off or they don't have this job or monthly income, they don't know how to make it anymore.
Yeah.
So it's finding people who believe that no matter where they land in this world, I know I can make it work, right? And
Mm.
that's the mentality in the people I'm looking for. And it's been very difficult to find those people, especially during this time.
Yeah.
I feel a lot of people are looking for safety nets right now rather than trying to
Risk.
take
Yeah.
risks.
Yeah.
Yes, and then a lot of people trying to take risks. So that's the first number one like big hurdle that I see.
Hmm.
The second one, I'm a designer. I'm not a tech person, so it's been such a learning curve understanding all the tech jargon that goes in. Because
Yeah.
as someone who's trying to build a tech startup, you need to understand when someone on your team tells you, "Hey, Rand, I'm facing this problem. I don't know how to solve it. Can you help me direct me to a resource that can?" Right? And if there's a bug in the tech, I'm gonna be like, "Cool."
Yeah. I don't know. Yeah.
What do you want me to do, right? And I cannot do
Yeah.
that as a leader. That's not okay.
Hmm.
So it's really getting that stuff. It's not actually getting the degree, but understanding what every step of software management looks like, and that's
Right.
product management, right? So it's
Right.
going through that product management route.
Hmm.
Um, it's building an MVP and understanding what investors look at. What users want and what investors want are almost always clashing,
Right.
right? They're never really the same. If you build something that is user centric, most likely investors are not going to like it. And if you build something that is investor or profit centric, most likely users are not going to like it. So
Hmm.
how do I build something that is simultaneously adjusting to both?
Yeah.
And man, that is difficult. Like,
Yeah.
because investors want the return on investment and users want value.
Hmm.
And sometimes those two don't go hand in hand in business.
Right.
Uh, so it's how do I strategically position myself so that I am making the right decision for both the users and for investors to hop on board and say, I like you, I like your business, let me give you some money to do it.
Yeah.
Um, so those have been the biggest
Right.
struggle. And honestly, like just every day, every night, grinding it out. That hustle,
Yeah.
man, it's exhausting. And like every
Yeah.
time you get through a problem, another one appears. It's like, hey, you took a break. No, that's not okay. Let me give you something else to work on right
That's
now.
right. Yeah. I have a friend who works in public policy, and he said something. I was at a talk with him, and he said, public policy is not about solving problems. It's about swapping problems for a slightly better set of problems. So like there is no solution. It's just you're like, how can I upgrade my problems and make them a little
Exactly.
less bad? And that's really what it feels like sometimes. And I think a lot of people, even non-entrepreneurs, are realizing that as they're trying to set up their home lives and their relationships, their social lives, figuring out money, figuring out, how to like not kill their other family members who are they're stepping all over in their house. It's like, okay, nothing's going to be perfect. So how can we just make it a little less horrible every day? Just, swap problems for just a slightly better and that incremental progress. And the mindset you're talking about, which I really, really love about, wherever you land in this world, you're going to be okay. And having that really deep set belief, I think is what separates the people who kind of start to give up or start to, yeah, let's say retreat to a safety net of a full-time job. Not that there's anything wrong with that at all, right? But it's like for me, I can never go back, I think, to a full-time job because I've made
I
my
I screwed up terribly because all my dad, all my professors, every single one told me then get a full-time job and then go do entrepreneurship. Because
yeah,
once you do this entrepreneurship thing, you can just never, never
yeah,
go back to getting
I
a full.
know.
I screwed up that I immediately went through it, and I'm like, every time I think about the possibility of this absolutely not working out and me having to finally get a source of income, a stable one, I feel like my soul is like done.
Well, I think it means you're gonna be successful because that's really, I think what a lot of it takes is there's no option. For me, it's like there's no option for me. I have no education, formal education. I have nothing really to go back to. So I have to make it work. And I think that's what keeps me on track. And I think that's what keeps a lot of entrepreneurs on track is kind of going all out for it and then just saying, I'll
Right.
figure it out. I have to make it
Yeah,
work.
it's the mindset that knowing that there's nothing in this world that you could do, and like there's nothing in this world I would rather do,
Yeah.
right? And I know if I do it, then I will not be true to myself and to who
Hmm.
I am,
Yeah.
right? So you just gotta make it work, no matter how many pivots it takes, no matter how many failures it takes.
For sure. And at the end of the day, it's about having control more or less over your time and your life and and feeling like you're building something that is yours. And that's, to me, that's the beautiful thing about it and why no matter when I see my wife or my friends who have full-time jobs and that stable income and that structure that they have, I go, yeah, that looks nice for a little bit, but I'm just so glad that it's this way that I'll
Mhm.
take the ups and downs.
Yeah,
Rand, thank you so much. We're at the sort of the end of the hour, but this was such an awesome conversation. Where can people find out more about uCast if they want to go check it out? Do you have a wait list for podcast creators? Do you have something that you would want people to go check you out at? Where should people find you?
yes, they can actually send me a message on LinkedIn. I'm currently building a wait list, and it's been a very long wait list. So if you want to be on there, the first step is reach out to me, message me on LinkedIn. I will set up a one-on-one, a very quick 15-minute one-on-one, and then they will add you immediately to the wait list, and then we go from there.
Okay, cool. So, and I'll post the link to your LinkedIn under this video to make sure people have that. And is that the best thing?
That's the best way. Or you
Okay.
can directly email me at my last name, first name at gmail.com.
Okay, great.
Yes.
And I'll put that in there as well. Thank you so much for doing this. It's really nice to talk to you. It's really exciting to see, because we worked together a little while ago. It's so exciting to see everything you've done since there. So just keep it up, and I can't wait to see what happens.
Thank you.
Okay, take care, Ren.
Okay.
Bye.